This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. In the 5 years of marriage, the most intimate thing Hailey and I did was to steal a kiss from her while she was drunk. Marrying me was a foolish act she did out of spite for her ambiguous relationship. Later, I died on a distant snowy mountain. I thought she would get her wish to be with her true love for life. But when my soul returned, I saw her bowing 3 times, climbing the 3,000 steps of Zhaoming Temple just to pray for my safe return. Only then did I realize how wrong I was. I died in the 5th year of our marriage. Died in a sudden avalanche, with the divorce papers still in my possession. These thin sheets of paper had been with me all along. Countless times, I wanted to send them back to Beijing to give Hailey her freedom, but each time, I selfishly hid them away. The cold, heavy snow covered my whole body, rendering me immobile, my consciousness fading. I never expected that after 5 years of entanglement, this would be the outcome. But maybe it's better this way, I thought. We were never meant to have an ending. Hailey, let's not meet in the next life. Perhaps the heavens couldn't bear to see me die in a foreign land, and thus didn't take my soul. My spirit passed through the snowy mountains, crossed rivers, and traversed vast grasslands, returning to Beijing, to Hailey's side. She had just received the news of my disappearance. Her expression was dazed, as if she hadn't anticipated my absence. The screen of her phone still glowed, with a text from my boss: avalanche, missing, status unknown. I floated in front of her, seeing her clear and bright eyes. When I was alive, I rarely had the chance to observe her this closely. Her eyes were beautiful peach blossom eyes, but perhaps due to her indifference toward me, they always held a chill like ice and snow. Suddenly, a tear rolled down her cheek. I instinctively reached out, but couldn't touch anything, watching helplessly as my phantom passed through her. Yes, I was already dead. Someone knocked at the door. It was Tony, who opened his arms to Hailey. Gently, he said, "Hailey, take care. You still have me from now on." Tony was Hailey's first love. Now that I was dead, they could finally be together. I turned away, unable to bear watching the woman I loved be embraced by someone else. Take care of what? Hailey's voice trembled, tinged with anger. He's not dead, just missing. Do you understand? Missing? Saying this, she seemed unwilling to accept the news of my death, shutting Tony outside. No matter how he coaxed, she wouldn't open the door. I saw her sit there, forlorn, behind the door, as if she had lost something very important. Yet she had been so indifferent to me. I floated beside her, trying in vain to comfort her. After a long while, dawn broke, and Hailey finally reacted. She stood up, took her car keys, and went out. The car sped towards the outskirts. At the foot of Zhaoming Temple steps, the once proud Hailey gazed blankly at the ancient temple that had stood for 1,000 years. After a long time, she knelt down. Passers-by looked on curiously while she bowed 3 times, murmuring prayers. I rushed to her side, wanting to stop her, but my hands passed through her body once again. It was all in vain. I heard her repeat a phrase, praying to the Buddha, "Protect my husband." Some kind-hearted passers-by tried to persuade her, even pulling her up, but she stubbornly knelt down, then got back up, knelt down again, and rose again. The scorching August sun beat down, yet she continued, her hair disheveled, blood seeping from her forehead, without stopping. But she was Hailey, a pampered young lady. She had never endured such hardship. I reached out, wanting to help her up, but human and ghost are on different paths. Even if we were close, I still couldn't touch her. Tony came over with an umbrella. For the first time, I hoped he could take her away. "He's dead," Tony shouted. "You can't disregard your own body for a dead man. Impossible." For the first time, Hailey showed such a fierce expression. "Absolutely impossible. He promised me he would return safely. He's been missing for a week. Even if he was alive, he would have starved to death. Don't deceive yourself anymore." These words hit Hailey like a thunderbolt. Her movements suddenly froze. She looked up at Tony. "He's dead. He won't come back." Tony coaxed her like a child. "Hailey, listen. Brother Tony will take you home." I stood beside Hailey, faintly grasping her scraped hand. I wanted to tell her that I was dead and to go with Tony. However, Hailey pushed him away, coldly saying, "Go away." Then she continued toward Zhaoming Temple. Climbing the last step, Hailey's legs trembled. She almost crashed through the temple doors with her body. Inside, an old monk in robes helped her up, his weathered eyes filled with compassion. "Where there is birth, there is death. This Mrs. Impermanence, benefactor, awakened to the orchid's cause early. Hailey's gaze darkened, as if all her strength had been drained. She knelt on the mat in confusion. Bowing her head, she knocked it once, and for a long time, she sobbed on the mat. In the distance, a heavy bell tolled from the deep mountains. I seemed to comprehend something and hurriedly floated in front of Hailey. I wanted to tell her, "Hailey, I'm dead. Hailey, you must be happy." The bell's sound pierced through my soul. Once, twice, thrice. The light of day brightened. In a daze, I seemed to see Hailey in a wedding dress. Her figure was slender and tall, wearing a satin wedding dress like a celestial maiden. I couldn't bear to part. My eyes couldn't help but warm. Now, the groom can kiss his bride. Not being able to kiss Hailey at the wedding was my lifelong regret. If only I could relive it. I blinked blankly, the fragrance of the bouquet in Hailey's hands filling my nostrils. I sensed something was off and bit my tongue hard. It hurt. It was real. I had returned to the day of the wedding. Our groom is mesmerized by the bride's beauty. Let's encourage the groom, shall we? The host said, his eyes strongly hinting. I came to my senses and looked at Hailey. She seemed indifferent, her eyes carrying a hint of disappointment. Her red lips parted slightly. No need. I quickly supported her waist, bending down to kiss her. I fulfilled the kiss I had lacked the courage to take in my previous life. Applause erupted in the hall. Hailey's ears turned red. The wedding that followed went smoothly, just like in my past life. On the wedding night, Hailey changed into comfortable pajamas, her brows slightly furrowed with fatigue, seriously explaining something to the person on the other end of the phone. When she saw me enter, she lowered her voice, but didn't hang up. She stood up, apologized to me, and walked outside into the study. On our wedding night in the previous life, she was just as busy. That night, there was an accident on a project she was overseeing. A worker fell from a building, his fate unknown. She had to reassure the investors and the workers, running around in a panic. At that time, I thought this was just a performance, that she didn't want to be with me. Later, she stayed in the study all night, and the next day, she plunged into work. I also postponed my vacation due to a small problem at the project and returned to the research institute the next day. Our relationship remained lukewarm. Even though we were a couple in the same household registration, we felt like strangers. Having been reborn, I wanted to repay everything I owed her. After thinking for a moment, I went into the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and brought it to the slightly ajar door of the study. Hailey glanced up at me, her eyes questioning. I walked over and said, "I made you a cup of coffee." Hailey's gaze fell on the coffee, and she replied blandly, "Thank you." After that, she began typing on her keyboard again. Until midnight, the light in the study only dimmed. I walked in, and she was indeed slumped over the desk, planning to tackle the rest of the night there. I walked straight in. In the darkness, Hailey shot me an impatient glance, her tone not good. "Is there anything else?" I turned on the light and said, "Sleeping like that on the desk is bad for your spine." Then I bent down and picked her up horizontally, saying, "You need to sleep well to have the energy to keep working." Hailey instinctively wrapped her arms around my neck, her eyes filled with a hint of panic. Before this, our most intimate gesture had only been holding hands. I laid her down on the bed. Hailey turned her face away, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I can't tonight." I was taken aback for a moment, then realized what she meant. I tucked the blanket around her and naturally lay down beside her. "I'm not bothering you. Just sleep early. Good night." Upon hearing this, Hailey didn't say anything more. After a long while, she finally wished me good night. Listening to the soft and gentle breathing from the other side of the bed, I finally felt the reality of being reborn. My heart finally settled down. In my past life, I thought Hailey didn't like me. She was noble, beautiful, a goddess with looks, wealth, and ability, whereas I was dull and awkward, a poor boy who could only afford to study thanks to Hailey's father, BAME scholarship fund. In the eyes of others, I was just her pet, called upon and dismissed at will. I was just a tool for her to vent her frustrations after being wronged by Tony. Our being together was just a scene she staged to annoy Tony, so I thought that our marriage was merely a small climax arranged for this play. After we married, I was troubled by her entangled relationship with Tony and mistakenly thought I was giving her space by distancing myself until I died on the snowy mountain and my soul floated back to the capital. I saw her bowing to Buddha for me. Only then did I realize how wrong I had been. My mind was filled with thoughts as I drifted into a deep sleep. When I woke up, Hailey was was putting on a silk shirt, revealing a glimpse of her fair waist. Noticing my gaze, she turned her head. I felt a pang of embarrassment, as if I had been caught peeking. "Up so early? Are you going to the company?" Hailey replied with a soft and added, "I probably won't be back until late tonight. You don't have to worry about me, just sleep early." As soon as she finished speaking, her phone rang insistently nearby. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Tony. Hailey instinctively looked at me. Getting a call from an old lover on the second day of marriage. Anyone would think too much. If this were in the past, I would have wallowed in self-pity, feeling that Hailey still had feelings for Tony. But I was already someone who had lived another life. So I got up nonchalantly and went about my business. Hailey hesitated for a moment and answered the phone. "Tony? Just woke up?" Tony's voice was gentle. "Do you want to sleep a bit more?" Hailey's tone was emotionless. "What do you need from me? I've already had someone take care of that issue on the construction site. You should have a week off. How about we go out together to relax? Just go to that villa in the countryside for a vacation. What do you think?" Even though Hailey's tone had grown cold, Tony's voice remained warm. He always did this, rejecting Hailey's advances while launching a gentle assault on her. Using the advantage that Hailey's father and Tony's family were old friends, he played with Hailey in the palm of his hand, making her chase after him for over 10 years. But he reminded me of something. We had a week of honeymoon leave. In my previous life, I thought Hailey had no feelings for me, and I selfishly canceled our vacation. Hailey was also busy with overtime. Our nice honeymoon ended up being rushed to meet deadlines due to our busyness. I didn't want to repeat that mistake, so I snatched Hailey's phone and said, "Not a chance, Mr. Tony. We have our own plans for the next week of honeymoon leave, so you don't need to worry." After speaking, I hung up without waiting for him to respond. I handed the phone back to Hailey, and her doe-like eyes stared at me in disbelief. There was confusion and incredulity in her gaze. After all, in my previous life, I always complied with her wishes and never would have dared to snatch her phone like this. Realizing my actions, I instinctively apologized. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "What do you mean?" Hailey interrupted me. I was taken aback. "What do you mean? The honeymoon leave, your plans?" Hailey smiled gently. She was already beautiful, and with that smile, she looked as warm as melting spring snow. Hailey's favorite is the deeply vibrant red rose. By the time we arrived at the hotel, it was already evening. After dinner, Hailey suggested taking a stroll by the river. The evening breeze was slightly dry, the sunset molten gold. I had just taken Hailey's hand, but unexpectedly, we ran into a few people around the corner. At the front was Tony. What bad luck. He noticed us and approached with a smile. Behind him, several other rich second-generation youths looked at me with the same kind of amusement. "Hailey, I didn't expect to see you here." It seemed like an illusion, but Hailey gently squeezed my hand. "I didn't expect to see you here either." Hailey paused. "Boss Tony?" Tony was taken aback, his eyes narrowing slightly behind his gold-rimmed glasses, showing a hint of displeasure, but he still managed to speak patiently. "Everyone's here, Hailey. Let's go for a walk together." "No, thank you." Hailey linked her arm with mine. "We are on our honeymoon, so you all enjoy yourselves." After speaking, she tugged at my sleeve and led me to walk around them. As we passed by Tony, he shot me a hostile glance. I raised my eyebrow, took Hailey's hand, and left. After we had walked a considerable distance, Hailey did not let go of my hand. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Hailey stopped. She looked up at me. "Why don't you ask me about Tony? What's there to ask him?" I squeezed her palm, just as she had done. Hailey's gaze was a bit cautious. "You don't mind me and him?" I leaned down and lightly kissed her lips. "Don't say that. Saying I didn't mind would be a lie. But who hasn't had a first love? It's just that I came too late. I used to like him, but that's all in the past. I'm willing to marry you, which means I won't leave you." I wrapped my arms around her waist and kissed her. After the kiss, her face instantly turned red, like a stunning rose. "You in public?" "I know," I whispered. "I know you won't, and neither will I." I never noticed before that she was this shy. I felt playful and pressed another gentle kiss to her lips. She pushed me away a little, her face showing a mix of annoyance. How shameless. After saying this, she walked a few steps ahead, but then she turned back, grasped my hand again, and pulled me away. Once the honeymoon was over, Hailey threw herself back into her busy work, and I returned to the research institute as usual. I even brought some wedding candies for everyone at the institute, handing them out during lunchtime one by one. As they received the candies, they expressed their surprise. "A big-name female president, and you really managed to marry her," someone teased, licking the dog, licking to the end, and you've got it all, Rocky. Well done. I smiled without saying anything. Suddenly, it fell silent around me. I followed everyone's gaze and turned to see Alice. She spread her hands. Senior brother, is there a share for me in the wedding candy? I smiled and placed the candy in her palm. Of course there is. The people around exchanged glances and seemed to have reached an unspoken agreement to leave. Alice's smile seemed a bit forced. I didn't expect it, senior brother. You're really with her. Living under the same roof with someone who doesn't love you, don't you feel uncomfortable? This is my family matter, I replied straightforwardly. How I feel is none of your business. I had known Alice since university, and later, we both joined this research institute. Even the rough guys in the group could see Alice's feelings for me. How could I not know? But feelings can't be forced, no matter what. Alice's eyes turned red, almost ready to cry. I didn't think my words were cruel. Being aloof with someone who loves you is a kind of cruelty. I've given you the wedding candy. I'll be going now. Enjoy it. After saying this, I didn't give her the chance to cry in front of me and turned to leave. Alice shouted from behind, I just think you're not worth it. Hailey is such a cold and heartless person. Why? I turned back to look at her, my voice growing cold. She is neither cold nor heartless. She is my wife, and we have a very good relationship. A few seconds later, I indeed heard her sobbing behind me. I didn't look back and left directly. After sending a report text to Hailey, I walked into the laboratory, preparing for a night of work. Being a researcher is a low-paying and troublesome job. Thankfully, Hailey is a wealthy woman, or I wouldn't dare to stay here. Late at night, I finally left the lab. While changing out of my lab coat, I heard colleagues' voices at the door. That's Miss Hailey, the beautiful female president. She really let this bumpkin get close to her. Look at him today. He's all smiles. Eating soft rice is also a skill. Hailey's family has donated a considerable amount of money to our institute. From now on, we guys have to support this pretty boy. Right after that, another voice rang out. It was Peter, who joined the institute with me. What Miss Hailey? She's just a leftover that Tony didn't want. She accompanied Tony to nightclubs as soon as she came of age. She looks unattainable, but in reality, she's already been played out. Rocky is just a sucker taking the fall. With that, the two of them erupted in lewd laughter. Leftover? Taking the fall? I hung up my lab coat and walked out, just in time to face the two of them. Seeing me, their faces turned a bit awkward, especially Peter, whose smile froze on his face. He coughed a few times. Ahem, I was just joking. Besides, I'm not wrong. She really was left over by Tony. I tightened my fist and swung it right at his face. Just you TMs have a mouth, huh? One punch, two punches. I brought out the fierceness I had from my earlier days in town. Each punch landed. I targeted wherever it hurt. People nearby couldn't pull us apart. To put it in later terms, I was like I had gone crazy. Hailey picked me up from the police station. At that time, Peter, whose face was as swollen as a pig's head, was sitting next to me. She was wearing high heels and a pencil skirt, with long wavy hair swaying gently. The fluorescent light shone on her, making it seem like her hair was glowing. She looked like a goddess descending from heaven. I thought to myself, then this goddess came to me. Her delicate brows furrowed and pinched my cheek. Peter, seeing her come over, grimaced through the pain and protested, your husband is a violent man, like a rabid dog. I tell you both, I won't let him off easily. That bastard still had the energy to complain, just as I was about to speak, but Hailey shot me a warning glance. The fight was eventually settled through Hailey's mediation. On the way back, Hailey remained silent. I knew I was in the wrong, so I tried every means to cheer her up. Once we entered the house, I hurriedly grabbed her hand. Hailey, I was wrong. I won't dare do it again. Please don't be angry. I'll make you pear soup later. Hailey glared at me fiercely and gave me a light slap on the forehead. Well, Rocky, I didn't know you were so good at fighting. If someone had stopped you later, you could have killed someone, right? I mumbled. I know my limits. I wouldn't kill anyone. That was the truth. I genuinely never intended to take that bastard's life. You know your limits. Hailey gasped angrily. Are you not afraid of getting hurt yourself? Seeing her mood calm down a bit, I cautiously took her hand. Don't you know what my limits are? You've seen me fight before. Thinking of that incident, I felt a bit proud. Don't worry, your husband isn't that foolish. Hailey shot me another glare, didn't say a word, stood up from the sofa and went into the bedroom. I messed it up. I sighed, looking at the sofa beneath me. It seemed I would have to settle for sleeping here tonight. Just as I picked up a cushion to fluff it, Hailey stormed out of the bedroom with an icy expression, slamming the door with a bang. She threw the medicine box on the coffee table. Give me your hand. I obediently stretched out my hand. She grabbed it and disinfected it with a cotton swab dipped in iodine. Only then did I realize the joint on my hand was scraped, bleeding, and it looked quite alarming. Hailey lowered her head slightly, seriously applying medicine to my hand. hand, a few strands of her silky hair brushing against my wrist. It tickled me, making me feel a bit giddy. After wrapping my fingers with a bandage, Hailey suddenly squeezed the injury lightly. I hissed. She grunted. "You do feel pain. Do you dare to fight again?" I quickly shook my head. I won't. I was lying to her. If it happened again, I would only hit harder. "Rocky, you agreed to marry me. If you dare to make me a widow, I won't let you off even in death," Hailey said fiercely. I looked at her, and a sudden urge to hug her surged within me. After a few seconds of silence, I picked her up in my arms. She shrieked in surprise, her palms slapping aimlessly on my back, not hurting at all. "I'm still mad at you, you rogue." "Rogue?" I nodded repeatedly. "Yes, I am a rogue. In this new life, I finally understand where the term asking for trouble comes from. In my past life, I was too stubborn. Hailey was too cold. I misunderstood her feelings for me, and she doubted my commitment to her. In the end, we were left with nothing but separation. But Hailey was never that cold. I noticed it after she had a fit, following the fight with Peter. Hailey is like a ragdoll cat. If you pet her patiently, she is gentle and kind. After the fight, I was suspended from work for half a month. With nothing to do, I became a stay-at-home husband. Every day I drove her to work and cooked for her. This peaceful life made me nearly forget about the fight. But Hailey actually had someone investigate that day's events thoroughly. All the hurtful words naturally reached her ears. When I found her, she was on the balcony, drowning her sorrows in alcohol. "I did like Tony, but I never thought of you as a backup. These years, I've owed you too much. That's why they dared to insult you like that." Hailey sat in a chair, wrapped in a beige shawl, sipping her drink, her eyes slightly red. I walked over and sat beside her. "You don't owe me anything. It's all my choice." This was the truth. Unlike Tony, Hailey didn't have those ambiguous feelings for people she didn't like, so she always rejected me straightforwardly. I had been using the excuse of repaying her kindness to stay by her side all these years. I met Hailey when I was 16. By then, my parents had been separated for 3 years, and I was a wild child nobody wanted, having dropped out of middle school and running around the streets, smoking, fighting, drinking, living a chaotic life with a clear end in sight. When I heard that the teacher who secretly gave me bread was ill, I brought 3 Yuanajin apples to visit. When I climbed over the wall, Hailey was standing below. The spring breeze blew, the pear blossoms fell like snow, and my apples rolled everywhere. She witnessed my most embarrassing youth. That year, Hailey was 17, accompanying her elder to inspect a factory in our town. When they were about to leave, the elder suddenly wanted to sponsor a poor student with good grades in the town, so she came along to have a look. She didn't speak, just as she was later perceived, cold and aloof. Yet she helped me pick up the apples and place them in my arms. After that day, I returned to my aimless life, until the teacher called, telling me that someone had covered my tuition and living expenses, and I should return to school. That sponsorship came from the BAME Scholarship Fund. I knew it was Hailey who gave me the spot. Before I went to Tibet in my past life, I returned to my hometown, and the retired teacher told me the sponsorship spots had already been allocated, and the one after me was added later by that girl. In the eyes of others, even in Hailey's eyes, I had always been the one who tolerated her and took care of her tirelessly, but only I knew it was Hailey who saved me. When Hailey poured herself a third drink, I grabbed the cup in my hand. She lunged to snatch it away. I quickly raised the cup high. With my height advantage, I successfully deterred her from grabbing it. Half drunk, Hailey turned away, hugging her knees. No matter how much I coaxed, she refused to turn her face towards me. I helplessly said, "Drinking is bad for your health, my wife." Hailey remained silent. I softened my tone a bit, almost using a childlike coaxing tone. "Come on, let's not drink this." Hailey was unmoved. "This is spicy and bitter, not good at all. How about I make you pear soup later?" Hailey finally reacted. "Add honey." "Sure, lots and lots of honey." I bent down and picked her up, along with her blanket. Hailey picked me up at the police station. At that time, I was sitting next to Peter, whose face was swollen like a pig's head. She walked in high heels, wearing a suit, her long wavy hair swaying, and the fluorescent light shining on her made it seem as if even her hair was glowing. It was as if a goddess had descended. I thought to myself. Then the goddess came before me, furrowed her brows, and pinched my cheek. Peter, who was beside me, saw her coming, endured the pain, and complained, "Your husband hits people like a mad dog. I'm telling you both, I won't let him off easily." This bastard still had the energy to babble. I wanted to speak up, but Hailey shot me a glare that made me shut my mouth. In the end, the fight was successfully carefully mediated with Hailey's intervention. On the way back, Hailey remained silent. I knew I was wrong and tried every means to cheer her up. As soon as we entered the house, I quickly grabbed her hand. "Hailey, I was wrong. I promise I won't do it again. Please don't be mad. I'll make you pear soup later." Hailey glared at me fiercely, and then she slapped my forehead. "Good for you, Rocky. I didn't know you could fight so well. Is it true that if others had stopped you later, you could have killed someone?" "Huh," I muttered. "I know my limits. I wouldn't kill anyone. That was the truth. I swear, I never intended to take that bastard's life. You know your limits." Hailey inhaled sharply. "Don't you fear that something might happen to you?" Seeing her mood calm down a bit, I tentatively grabbed her hand. "Do you really not know how I fight? You've seen me before, haven't you?" Thinking back to that incident, I felt a bit smug. "Don't worry, your husband isn't that foolish." Hailey glared at me again, said nothing, stood up from the couch, and went into the room. I messed up. I sighed. Looking at the couch beneath me, it seemed I'd have to make do here for the night. Just as I picked up a pillow to fluff it, Hailey came out of the bedroom with a cold expression, slamming the door behind her. She threw the first aid kit on the coffee table. "Give me your hand." I obediently extended my hand. She grabbed it and disinfected it with a cotton swab dipped in iodine. That's when I noticed the skin on my knuckles was scraped, bleeding, and it looked quite gruesome. Hailey bowed her head slightly, seriously applying medicine to my hand. A few strands of her smooth, long hair brushed against my wrist. It made me feel a bit ticklish inside. After wrapping my fingers with a bandage, Hailey suddenly pinched the injured area lightly. I hissed in pain. She huffed, "You know it hurts, huh? If you dare to fight again, will you still do it?" I hurriedly shook my head. I won't. I was lying. If it happened again, I would hit harder. "Rocky, you promised to marry me. If you dare to make me a widow, I won't let you off even in death," Hailey said fiercely. Looking at her, I suddenly felt an urge to hug her. After a few seconds of silence, I picked her up in my arms. She gasped in shock. Her palms slapped against my back, not hurting at all. "I'm still mad at you, you scoundrel." "Scoundrel?" I nodded repeatedly. "Yes, I'm a scoundrel. Having lived a past life, I see those slanderous words in a much lighter way. The research institute was busy, and those rumors would soon drown in the heavy workload. But Hailey didn't think so. She pressured the institute, and Peter left the research institute 1 month after my reinstatement. In my previous life, this Peter was dismissed for nearly leaking institute secrets, and Hailey had no hand in it. After that, I didn't hear any more rumors about me and Hailey. At the end of the year, Hailey took me to her family's annual banquet. The black velvet gown accentuated Hailey's graceful figure. She linked her arm with mine, introducing me to those business tycoons and social elites one by one. In such occasions, it was inevitable to run into Tony. He was standing next to some prominent person's daughter, and they had just announced their engagement. The support brought by political business marriages was exceptional, and he was surrounded by flattering businessmen. Through the crowd, his gaze fell on Hailey beside me. I wondered what he was thinking. I was a bit surprised by his engagement news. After all, according to the timeline from my previous life, he was still very enthusiastic about Hailey at this point. Engagement was a long way off, but it also felt expected. After all, anyone watching could see that my relationship with Hailey was complicated and twisted. In this life, the engagement came earlier, perhaps because he knew Hailey had completely given up on him. In the second half of the banquet hall had turned into an informal trading place, and Hailey began discussing new collaborations with those business elites. I discreetly withdrew to the balcony for some fresh air. "You and Hailey seem to be getting along well." Hailey's father, Bame, had come in without me noticing. Though in his 50s, he still looked spirited. I nodded. "We've known each other for many years." Bame sighed deeply. "My daughter is always strong, and her mother passed away early, so her feelings for family have always been lukewarm. She's not happy at home, which is why Tony could take advantage of her. In the end, I, as her father, owe her too much." I looked at the cup in my hand, not speaking. Hailey indeed didn't seem to have much affection for her family. Several New Year celebrations she spent alone outside. After her mother passed away, I was busy working. It was Tony who stayed by her side. Don't blame her for being devoted to him back then. "I will treat Hailey well," I said softly. Bame glanced at me sideways. "If you dare to treat Hailey poorly, I, as her father, won't let you off." I raised my head to look at him and promised again. "Hailey is my wife. She has chosen me, and I will never let her down." "Let's hope so." Bame exhaled a smoke ring. "As she mingles in there, you don't understand business matters. Just listen. It might help a bit." With that order, I had to return inside. side. Did my dad make things difficult for you? I looked down. No. The expression on her face was clearly skeptical. Really? It was normal for her not to believe me. Bame always thought our marriage was a joke. The beginning, my marriage to Hailey was arranged hastily. From getting the license to the wedding, it took only a week. At that time, everyone, including myself, thought my marriage with her was a trick to make Tony jealous. Bame thought the same. After all, which father-in-law and son-in-law meet for the first time at the wedding? In my previous life, when Hailey brought up divorce, he even tried to persuade me. Surprisingly, he was there to persuade us to stay together. He said Tony was no good. He couldn't bear to watch his daughter fall into a pit of fire. With a helpless smile, I wrapped my arm around Hailey's waist. It's a lie. He said if I dared to bully you, he'd chop me into pieces. Hailey was momentarily taken aback. Then she chuckled. He would say such things. After the banquet, Hailey and I got into the car to head home. Her expression was somewhat dreamy, leaning on my shoulder, quiet as a cat about to nap. When we arrived home, an uninvited guest appeared at the door. Hailey glanced at the person outside the car, biting her lip, unsure of what to think. Tony leaned against the wall, his head slightly lowered. In the drizzling night, he looked like a down-and-out young man full of melancholy. TSK, why not just stab him? I accompanied Hailey out of the car. Tony immediately jogged over, and when he saw my coat draped over Hailey, his eyes filled with a hint of despondency. I couldn't stand his green tea act, so I spoke directly. Mr. Tony, why are you squatting here at this late hour instead of accompanying your fiancée? He looked at Hailey and softly said, Hailey, can we talk? I've already discussed next year's cooperation with your brother. Is there any other business between us? Hailey, you know that's not what I meant. I'm with Serena. As he spoke, he glanced at me, his expression conflicted. I adjusted Hailey's coat. What are you staring at? Haven't you ever seen a loving couple? Seeing that Hailey had no intention of sending me away, he could only smile wryly and shake his head. Forget it. We can talk properly another time. After saying that, he looked at Hailey with a sad expression. Hailey, goodbye. Watching his lonely figure retreat, I found it particularly ironic. Before I married her, he was always her first choice. He had pushed her further away, and now he was trying to act deep and sentimental. He was clearly the biggest beneficiary of the engagement to the daughter of the Tang family, yet here he was acting like he had no other choice. Wait, Hailey suddenly spoke up. Tony turned around immediately, his surprise clearly evident in his eyes. Hailey paused, then said earnestly, there is no future between us. Tony went rigid. Speaking of which, we don't really have a past either. It was all one-sided on my part. Now, my heart is no longer with you. From now on, let's each go our separate ways. She held my hand firmly and said softly, don't bother me anymore. Tony seemed to collapse completely. I supported Hailey's waist and led her inside. The rain outside grew heavier, and that desolate figure seemed to still be lingering. I pulled the curtains. Hailey didn't really care about what was happening outside anyway. Wrapped in a blanket, she told me that the pear soup she made today was very sweet. After that unhappy parting with Tony, he really didn't appear in front of us again. The next time I saw him was at his wedding with Serena. Originally, Hailey didn't plan to come, but old man Bame was busy taking his wife out for a trip. The wedding could only be attended by Hailey and me. An excellent ex should be like someone who has passed away, not like this, popping up from time to time, as if wronged. She chattered in the fitting room. How does this look? She pulled open the curtain with a flourish. I affectionately rubbed her hand and replied, beautiful. My wife looks good in anything. At the wedding, Tony saw Hailey and could already calmly toast without changing his expression. From then on, Tony completely retreated from Hailey and my lives. Years later, news of a new species discovered on the snowy mountains came. I began to feel the urge to go to Tibet. In my previous life, although I had the intention of avoiding Hailey, the discovery of the mutated snow lotus, there was the fundamental reason that prompted my trip. After Hailey found out I was going to Tibet, she threw quite a fit. However, she gradually understood my decision. 2 days before my departure, she asked me to accompany her to Zhaoming Temple outside the city. In my past life, Hailey prayed for my safety here. In this life, she brought me along, still praying for my safety. I was moved, kneeling with her under the solemn gold-plated statue of Buddha. She asked for a bracelet and put it on my wrist. The thin oxygen on the plateau made things quite difficult for me. I adapted over 2 months. Hailey took time almost every day to video call me. Watching me apply the creams and lotions she bought, I was happy, and the research team often teased me, saying I was henpecked. As the date of the avalanche from my past life drew near, I felt an unease creeping in. This unease peaked when Peter joined the research team. After being reborn for so long, because my emotional path with Hailey was different, I subconsciously felt that everything was heading in a positive direction. But now that I think about it, people's views on our marriage, Tony and Serena's relationship, and Peter joining the research team, all these events, seemingly developing differently from my past life, were actually reaching the same conclusion for various reasons. Does that mean my ending will also? I dared not think. Life and work proceeded in an orderly manner. Peter, like in my past life, looked at me with a lingering resentment in his eyes. He exuded a despondent yet fervent aura. It was no wonder. After all, he was kicked out of the research institute by Hailey because of a fight with me. I decided to climb the mountain ahead of schedule. In my past life, this climb was to collect blue snow lotuses and document their living environment. I could handle this task alone. On the 3rd day after the snow stopped, I reported to the team and set out to the mountain alone. Having trained and with the memories from my past life, the route I chose wasn't particularly difficult, and it was even somewhat easy. But I didn't dare to be careless, constantly observing my surroundings. I saw Peter. He was sneaking around not far from me. Suddenly, he slipped. Though I disliked him, I wasn't cold-blooded enough to leave him alone in this desolate, snow-covered mountain. So I walked up to him and extended my hand. "Can you still walk?" I can't walk anymore." He lifted his eyes to look at a certain spot, his gaze mixed with inexplicable excitement and madness. I followed his line of sight. There was a black backpack with a wire sticking out from somewhere, sparking and sizzling. I suddenly realized, my brain instantly clear as if submerged in ice water. Fuck. I cursed quietly and threw a handful of snow at him. Peter lunged at me like a mad dog. We wrestled together. He was small and couldn't match me in a fight, but he held onto my waist tightly, not letting go no matter how hard I hit him. Then, with a loud bang, the explosives in the backpack detonated. Immediately, there was the booming sound that I had heard before being buried in snow in my past life. I kicked Peter away and ran to a large rock. Before the snow mixed with stones surged over my head, the white snow filled my entire field of vision. I moved my body and made the emergency call. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually, someone dug me out. The glaring sunlight made my eyes ache. Later, I found out that my left eye was bruised from Peter's punch. I was admitted to the hospital, and Hailey took the night train to see me. When she arrived, I had just woken up from anesthesia, feeling dazed and sleepy. Scenes from both past and present flashed through my mind. For a moment, I even thought that everything after my rebirth was a beautiful dream. Before I died in the snow melted into water, and the sound falling beside my ear was so clear. I opened my eyes. It wasn't melting snow, it was Hailey crying. The dazzling sunlight of the plateau danced on her face, like a hazy long shot in a movie. I struggled to lift my hand and wipe away her tears. "Hailey," I asked her, "what's today's date?" "You heartless one. Why don't you ask me how worried I was about you?" She sobbed and cried even more, eventually collapsing onto me. I turned my head just in time to glimpse the calendar. October 16th. It was the day after I died in my past life. I gently patted Hailey's back. "Hailey, everything will be fine from now on." I hadn't fully healed, but I went back to the capital with Hailey. On one hand, I wanted to ease her worries. On the other hand, it was her first time in Tibet, and she was suffering from altitude sickness, so I couldn't bear to have her stay any longer. Peter died on the snowy mountain, and the police found traces of explosives in his room. After the investigation results were released, Hailey felt guilty about getting him expelled from the research institute. I recalled my past life. "This has nothing to do with you. Evil people will always have 1,000 reasons to do wrong." "You're right." Hailey touched the beads on my hand and smiled. "Let's go fulfill our vows." She blinked and said, "Although we shouldn't be superstitious, when you make a wish, you have to repay it. That's the rule." I held her hand. "Whatever you say, my wife." Hailey's side story. Falling in love with Rocky seemed like the most normal thing. He was honest, resilient, and smart. Most importantly, he accepted me unconditionally and would always stand by my side. Years after we got married, when talking about our first meeting, Rocky told me that his memory of me started with that pear tree. But my memory of him went back even further. My parents got together because of an arranged marriage. There wasn't much affection between them. When I was 7, my mother passed away from illness, and my father quickly remarried his childhood sweetheart, who then gave birth to 2 sons. My situation at home was quite awkward. I felt like a transparent person, always isolated, so I decided to do something to get their attention. I chose academic competitions. It turned out I had no talent for competitions, though I managed to earn a few rankings through hard work. Once I got to high school, studying became increasingly difficult, so I withdrew from competitions and shifted my focus to preparing for college entrance exams. During my arduous and monotonous competition days, Rocky was probably a common shadow among our group. No matter how many names changed below, Rocky always topped the list. The first time I saw him was in that small town's alley. I was visiting my uncle's factory with him, and after the tour, they were busy partying and drinking. I didn't like such occasions, so I wandered outside alone. The alley in the town was winding and twisting, and I unknowingly got lost, not returning to the main road until the moon rose. At that moment, I came across a group of 5 or 6 boys who were leaning against each other, laughing. Someone whistled at me flirtatiously, and then a tall, skinny guy kicked him hard. His voice was a bit hoarse. "What are you calling out for? Showing off your mouth?" Saying that, he pulled the boys, who were almost blocking the path, aside, making room for me. As I passed them, the boy who spoke clicked the lighter in his hand, the flame illuminating his face, and I caught a quick glimpse. He had a distinct profile, with a hint of youthful innocence. He casually pointed in a direction. "Walk this way, you can get out." I quickly thanked him, not wanting to get entangled with this group. At the end of the path, someone called out to him, "Rocky, that was our first meeting." I told him about it, and he looked a bit wistful, murmuring, "So it was that early." Later, I included his name on the sponsorship list. He didn't disappoint his talent, and got into the botany department of a university. The day before the freshman semester started, I was tricked into a bar by Tony's friend, claiming he was drunk and had no one to pick him up. It was Rocky who saved me. After that, he became the butt of jokes. A devoted follower in everyone's eyes, spending every day by my side besides attending classes. I rejected him several times, but I still felt uneasy accepting his kindness. Whenever he was around, my attention would shift away from Tony. Some say love is like death, because both are unpredictable and inevitable. After Rocky appeared, I finally understood this metaphor. It took me a full 5 years to accept the fact that I loved Rocky. 4 years in college, and a year after entering Hailey's family business. When I figured it out, I proposed to Rocky. His eyes were calm, and my passionate feelings didn't stir even a ripple in his gaze. Suddenly, I realized that 5 years were enough for me to see my heart clearly, but also enough for Rocky's affection to fade away. 5 years was simply too long. I was afraid he would leave, so the wedding preparations were quite rushed. We would still have many more 5-year periods. I reassured myself, feelings could be nurtured anew, and Rocky showed me with his actions that his love had not changed. I was so happy. Thankfully, it was still not too late, and thankfully he was willing to wait for me that long. After returning from Tibet, I went with him to Zhaoming Temple to fulfill our vow. When Rocky went to offer incense, an old monk with a white beard was interpreting a fortune for a couple. He said that the bonds of this life are all sought after through hard wishes from previous lives and should be cherished. I knelt before the Buddha statue. If my connection with him in this life was indeed the result of my previous life's earnest wishes, could I be a bit greedier? Could I wish for another life with him, or even the next after that? The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.